Hello, hello. I am having some technical issues. Is everything working? Let me know if you can see me. Okay, let me know if you can hear me. Also, if anyone is watching, type in the chat if you can hear me. It's been all afternoon trying to get my professional camera to work once again, and apparently it's not compatible with this software anymore. So I'm either going to have to find different software or something. But let me know, can you see me and hear me okay in the chat if anyone is watching? And there is a little bit of a delay as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully people can hear me. I don't know. Loud and clear. Wonderful, Lonnie. Thanks so much for letting me know. And thanks for tuning in. I do see some people in there. Linda, yes. Oh, good. I'm so glad it's working. This has been really hectic to get this to work. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in. If you did not see the live stream last week, what we did was we created a dress pattern. This was the dress pattern that I did from my sloper, and I did this sloper with the GRD method. So I used my sloper pattern, which is a base pattern made from my moulage. The moulage I made the dress form with, the moulage with the GRD method online course that I teach. And so what I did first was I fit the garment and I pinned it to make it a bit tighter. I made the adjustments in that previous live video, and then I did design tape on the that's the fitting before the live, and then I did design tape and I basically marked out all the pattern design lines and pleats and everything on the pattern. And we're going to continue that live stream because I had several people email wanting to know more about making facings, linings, and adding the seam allowance. So wonderful that you're joining the Pressed Flower Guild from the UK. So glad to see you all here. So thanks so much. And we're going to go ahead and get straight into it. In case you want to learn about the online courses I teach, there are links in the description with free mini courses that tell you more. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do the overhead camera. This is the best I could do. It's not the professional camera, but we're going to continue where we left off on the last live. And what I've done is I've taped additional paper to the back here, and we're going to continue marking our seam allowances. I love to use the clear ruler for seam allowances, and I'm marking from this line using that seam line and doing a 3/8 inch seam allowance, which is 1 centimeter. And so I'm continuing that process all the way up. And I know there are other tools that a lot of people like to use for seam allowances, but I always love this kind of manual method. For the upper section at the shoulder, I'm going to go ahead and give a 1 inch seam allowance, which is 2.5 centimeters. Armhole, I'm going to do a 3/8 seam allowance. And like we talked about last time, whenever we're making seam allowances, we need to consider the corresponding adjacent pattern pieces. So we're going to get to that as well. And I'm going to be adding a little bit extra seam allowances in areas that I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to like the positioning. So if I need to add a little bit more to the length than I have, then here a 1 inch seam allowance. And I tend to keep consistencies when I'm adding seam allowance. So if I always do 3/8 along the armhole, that's kind of a general for me. Once I know my armhole positions are good on my sloper, and then I go with similar, same positions over and over again. And side seams I tend to give 1 inch just to have a little room to play. Length about 1 inch as well. So you're going to see, and 1 inch is equivalent to 2.5 centimeters. Okay, and then for the rest, I like to give 3/8 of an inch. So that's what you're going to see me doing, giving that amount there. And when we get further along, we're going to be putting the pattern pieces together. adding the facing or creating the facing, and so on. So this is one other thing I like to do is I like to write SS for side seam. This would be PL for princess seam. This is my back, so I need to make sure I'm writing that. And that's back upper, center back. Side seam is always important to write. And so I have this as a center back fold generally, or on the front it would be a fold. On the back, when we have a zipper, I like to allow 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. And here, since I did 1 inch on the upper section, I also want to mimic the same here. So even though it's quite a bit, I have a little room to play in case I'm not pleased with the position of that seam line. So this is the midriff here. And okay, so nice to see more people joining. So side seam, the same thing. If we've added a certain amount of seam allowance on this side seam, we need to continue that same seam allowance all the way down. That's why I like to write SS for side seam. And this is PL for princess line. That would be basically like putting those side seams together. This is actually my center front. So then I don't want seam allowance there. This is going to be on the fold. So I like to do that and fold, mark it, and then I would write front. Seam the grain line we already did previously. Now this one I'm also going to do a 1 inch on the bottom. I normally wouldn't do 1 inch unless I'm not sure about my design line positions. Whenever I'm not sure about my design line positions, I like to have a little extra buffer in there so that I can make sure I'm happy with it at the end, and that then continues all the way down. Okay, so we're gonna remember that because when we do the skirt, we need to also do the same seam allowance. So it gets a little tricky if we're not marking down the side seam. So this would be princess line. And I could give 5/8 of an inch there. I could give more than 3/8 of an inch. So 5/8 of an inch would be about 1.5 centimeters. Or you could just bump it up to 2 centimeters, kind of whatever's easiest. So we do have a bit of a strange line here. I'm gonna go with my original shape because I already added a little bit here, but really I would generally like to see this shaved off, but I'm gonna wait until the fitting to see if I need to shave it off, because it's always better to have a little extra in case, and then we can shave it off later in the fitting if needed. So this is my center front, CF. I've already marked that it's the front, and I'm gonna do 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters for the waist. So we are jumping right in. Neckline, if I'm not sure about my neckline, I could give more. But since I think I liked where I had that design tape, hopefully. And you know what, these small pattern pieces, if for some reason it doesn't turn out how I think it might turn out, I probably have enough fabric to make or cut out another one if I need to. Or if there were parts that I wasn't sure about, I could maybe cut out the top portion in the muslin or calico if you're from the UK, and do a test and see, is this what I imagine the fit to look like? If I get down to the pleated area of the skirt, that is one area that I wouldn't trust my muslin or calico to, because it's going to drape very differently unless I have something that's really draping close to my original fabric. Okay, and then we mark the center front here with our double arrow fold. Okay, now we're going to be adding the facings after we do this, and the reason why I like to do it after is I'll show you a little shortcut later. Okay, and this one I did not true up yet. You can see it's coming to a slight point there, so I want to make sure I do that. So from center back over, just making sure that's nice and clear as well. That's pretty smooth, but it's coming up. That's looking good. Okay. Any little point is going to show up in our sewing process, and those little points are the things, or V's, that we definitely need to pay attention to when we're truing the pattern. So truing means that we're drawing in all the lines, using our rulers, making them look nice and smooth and continuous, and those little V's and points can really make a difference. Oops. So I accidentally was taking the black line here. I'm taking the lower line. So I need to pay attention to that. All right. No, so nice to see you. Someone from Nigeria joining us. And we have, wonderful. Oklahoma, okay. Georgia. So nice. You have the sound all the way up, so maybe I need to put the microphone a little closer. Is that better? If the sound is loud enough. I don't have a very loud voice, so okay. Center back, we're going to give 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. Make sure we have enough for that zipper back there. Now, if I was doing a zipper in the side seam and center back on the fold, I would be paying attention to that as well. Okay, so we're looking pretty good here, and we're going to continue on with the front. So 3/8 of an inch, I know this is kind of tedious stuff. It will go fast though. We're going to get through it quickly and as quickly as we can with manual work. When we have a computer software program to do patterns, it goes way quicker. But once again, we want to remember where we're putting the seam allowance, because what's going to happen is if we don't do 1 inch here and here, we're going to end up misaligning the pattern pieces later on. So we want to make sure that those are correctly aligned. Okay, and now when I'm doing my seam allowance, I don't true the lines with the curved rulers. I usually just cut it out because it's a close enough positioning, meaning I'm not connecting the dots, and it just saves time. If you really want to, you of course can use your curved rulers. It's just going to add a lot more time to it. Okay, sound is better. Great. Someone from the Boston area, Sandy. Oh, Kathleen, thanks for letting me know. It's a little better. And Julie. Oh, it's so nice to see you, Julie. Okay, so it's looking good so far. Now the next thing I'm going to do before I start to cut things out, I'll try to use another color so you can see. Hopefully that one will work. Okay, so like we talked about before, we need to align the pattern pieces, and we need to consider which way we're putting the seam allowances. Where's my tape? 1 second. Okay. So, sorry for the shake. Okay, so when we put together the front and the back like this to this, we want to make sure it's nice and continuous, and it looks like I didn't shave off a little. Oh, I wanted to adjust the back neckline. That's what I wanted to do in the last live, and I forgot. So we need to true the shoulder seams and make sure that they're the same length and that it's continuous. Okay. All right, so I did cut off a little bit off the front last time, and I want to make sure that this is nice and continuous here. This kind of curve. So I would probably mark it off continuously like that. A slight curve there going in, and then this way going this way. And this is totally up to you as the designer, how deep you want that, and so on. So Of course, you got to redo some things. Okay, and that's going to just open it up nicely. Now, another thing we can do is we can put it on the dress form, which we're going to do shortly after we cut this out. We're going to make sure that the seam allowances are folded in the direction where we would iron those seams towards. So if we're going to be having an open seam, or that means both sides are going open. So this would be, I folded the front back, and I would fold the back this way as well. And that way it would be an open seam on the inside. We're ironing the seam open. Now, if I wanted it to go to the back of the garment, I would go like this. And then I would use my tracing wheel through this. This time I'm going to be doing it open. I like my shoulder seams open usually. And I want to make sure it's folded really on that seam nicely. Okay, I'm going to X out my old lines. And if I was using a pencil, I'd be using an eraser. Okay, that seam at the shoulder is going to be, I think I don't have enough here. Oh no, it's just enough. Okay, so I'm going to use my tracing wheel, the pointed one, and I'm going to mark along the seam line here to mimic the same shape on this side. Because if I was not mimicking it, I would be coming in this way, and that's actually 1/8 of an inch off, which is about 3 millimeters. And that little bit could end up pulling the garment strangely in this area. Now, more than likely, I am going to be cutting off the seam allowance to be shorter when I finish the fitting part of it. But I want to make sure it's nice and lining up in case I do end up keeping it. So you can see this is a huge difference that I actually don't need. And really, I should be using my rulers to true this up. And there. So we can see this is my seam line. This is my seam allowance edge, the cut line. I would have a notch here if I was doing a production pattern. Notch here and here to indicate that I have a 1-inch seam allowance. Over here, you can see we have quite a change here. And then this is actually pretty much the same line. Okay. Now, I would X out anything old so I'm not accidentally cutting out the wrong part. Or I could use a different color, which I was going to. This part I already did in the last live. We're going to then look up the front princess seam. Okay. Oh, Louisa, you're here. Wonderful. Okay. Susan, great to see you again. Thanks for joining. Okay, so I'm going to be folding along the seam line here. Seam line means sew line. And I need to make sure that I really trued this. And I'm walking those pattern pieces together. And it is matching up really nicely. Okay. So just making sure that this length is matching up with this length. We can also measure it as another option. But we can see I have the option of having the seam going down or going up or open, just like we did this. But for this one, I generally prefer it going down. So I'm going to do it going down. Some people really like it going up. And, you know, my first job sheet would always do everything up because it is a little bit easier for top stitching. I'm not going to do top stitching on this dress. How did I do the other one? I'm trying to remember. I don't even remember. It's been, okay. I folded it downward. So this one I folded downward to match this. The trick about folding it upward is sometimes this gets to be a really strange shape depending on how this princess seam pattern is shaped. So sometimes if we fold it one way and we end up with a really funky shape there, sometimes we just choose to do it the other direction. You can even tape this. I want to make sure it's a nice continuous seam here because we have a little bit of a jog, meaning that the seam line is, or the seam allowance edge is not matching up. So I want to make sure it's nice and continuous. And then I'm going to use this to go through my layers. So this is as if the seam is pointing downward. The tricky thing is if you imagine the seam going around the curve, it can be a little bit tricky, so we have to triangle notch it out afterwards. And then this one we have to do slits. So we're triangling notches out whenever we have a convex curve and we're folding towards that shape, and this seam edge is longer than the seam line, we're always doing triangle notches. Okay, so we think about where the fabric's going, and if the seam line is longer than if the seam allowance edge cut line is longer than the seam line, we have to do triangle notches. If we have, let's say, a concave curve, the armhole, and the seam edge is shorter, if we really measure up this seam edge line compared to the seam line, or seam allowance edge line to the seam line, we can see that this is shorter than this, right? This is getting bigger because it's naturally getting bigger, right? And whenever we have that and we're folding that way, then we have to cut slits. Okay, so always think, is this shorter? If this is shorter and it's folding to the bigger side, we need slits. If it's longer and it's folding towards the shorter side, we need triangles. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. Okay, Louisa, can you hear me okay? Can everyone else hear? Sound is still very low. You know what? I don't know what else to do because I've turned it up as much as I can turn it up. And it's so strange because the last time it was so nice and loud. Can you hear me okay if I push it even closer? Is that better? Okay. Okay, I hope it's better. I don't know what else to do. I've turned it up as much as I can. The sound is better with earbuds and plenty loud. Okay, Nikki, thanks for letting us know. Okay. All right, so we're going to use that line. We're not going to use this line because that was my you probably can't see it, but my armhole trace line here. Okay. All right. Carrie, you can hear me. Thanks for letting me know. I don't know. Sometimes this technology really does what it wants. Okay. So the next thing we have, okay, we're going to fold this inward. Usually when we're kind of coming down, we don't have to worry so much about where we're folding it to because it's not going to be a huge difference. And for this one, I'm probably going to be folding it downward for this line. But I do want to check and see, oh, see, we made a mistake. I forgot to true these lines together. We want to make sure we're not getting a V. Okay. So, continually making this. So we already trued the midriff. Oops. And then we want to make sure that this is matching it. Federica, you can hear me. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah, it's so strange. The last time I used this microphone, it was showing it was all the way up in the red zone, meaning it was too loud. And I didn't change anything in the settings. Okay. All right, so if we're folding it downward, we just need to consider to make sure it's big enough for the lower section. And if we imagine this to this, we're going to have plenty of space here. So this would be folded down a little bit, and this is longer than this seam because it's a convex curve. So we should be totally fine with those curves. All right. And if we wanted to fold it up this way, we would do the same thing. We would use our tracing wheel to go through it. Okay, so this is all looking good. I think we're clear there. This one, I think we're looking really good. And then this, with the back. Okay, this we already did, that section. Lower section, probably need to true the bottom. Okay. Oh, and added Bluetooth speakers. You can hear better with the Bluetooth speakers. Good. Okay, let me quickly true this. So I love this community. Thanks so much for giving all these tips about the sound. You guys are amazing. You really are. Okay, so it's a little bit tricky to see, but we're walking that pattern together. It's pretty close. It's coming to a V. We don't want a V. We want to make sure it's nice and smooth and continuous. See, that little bit would show up in our pattern. It would not look as good. So, okay. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is, I can also check those side seams, make sure that those are looking good. From here to here. And I usually put my side seams towards the back. That means the front we're allowing to go flat, and the back we are folding. And what did we do here? Okay, there we go. So you can see I have lots of lines. This is my cut piece from before, so ignore this. I kept those cut pieces on there, so I know how much I took off from the sloper. Okay, that's looking really nice and trued, and I can use that tracing wheel underneath here. Okay, here and here. That's looking like I need just a little bit more of the height here, and I'll use the green so that I remember that that is my new line. I mean, really, if you're using pencil, you can just erase it and then you know. Okay, and that is coming down a little bit there. That way I just have enough room in case I do keep that 1 inch seam allowance on the side. If I want to, I can keep it. I usually use it just for the fitting, and then I'll take it off if I don't need it. But a nice thing to do is to keep it there in case you do change sizes. And in the future, if you gain a little weight, you can easily take out those side seams and make it just a little bigger if you have the seam allowance there. Okay, and then we want to do anything else? This side seam. These are our midriffs, front to back. And we want to make sure that this is going to the back. So I'm folding at the seam of the back. Oh, and I made a mistake. That's why we true our pattern pieces, because see, I did a 3/8 here and I did a 1 inch here. Not good, right? Because we'd have 1 inch everywhere else, and I would have cut this piece out and it would be incorrect. Okay. So we're going to go up to 1 inch. I will go with the green so I remember. 1 inch is 2.5 centimeters. And you, as the designer or sewist, you can choose then what seam allowances you like the most. There's no right or wrong there. Okay. Center back there. Okay. And we want to also make sure that if these were sewn together, that it's looking nice and smooth. And that's looking pretty good. We have a slight shape in there, which is nice. And we're going to X out the old. Okay. All right, so we can do our tracing now to make sure that it is enough. Okay, and that's looking quite good. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and quickly cut this stuff out. We still have a lot to do. I'm going to be cutting it out and then putting it on my dress form. If you don't have a dress form, you don't have to do this step, or you could do this step on your own body, which is a great thing to do. I don't know if any of you have heard this Palmer and Pletch, I think is how you say the name, fitting, and they do this tissue fitting. It's another fitting method, which I actually haven't used their specific methods before, so I can't attest to them. But the concept is similar, that we're putting the paper pattern pieces on the dress form or on our body, and we're checking them. And we're basically seeing, okay, how is it looking? Are these design lines looking how we imagine them to be? Is it fitting okay? And I like to do this test for anything that's form fitted. If it's something loose, it doesn't work quite as well, in my opinion, especially with the thicker paper. But we'll do a quick test and see how it's looking. Then after we do that, we're going to create still the facing pieces, and we're going to then create the lining pieces. And there are different ways of doing this as well. It's, I want to take the lower line there. We can do the lining actually after we do our fitting. So a lot of pattern makers, and that's what I often do, is I like to do a complete sewing of the external garment before I do the lining, because that way if I make any adjustments to this pattern, then I have already done it when I create the lining pattern. But since I'm doing this live, I thought I'll just do it a little bit differently than I normally do, and I know that this is going to fit me quite well because I've made other garments from this sloper many times. And I think the biggest thing is just kind of trialing out what your best method is for the order of things and seeing, okay, is this something that I like this order to, or if you end up making all of your fitting adjustments and then you have to make all those same adjustments to your lining pattern, it can be a little bit tedious. So it's really up to you and what you like the most for the order in which you do things. All right. So how is everyone? How is summer going, or almost fall, autumn? We have sunshine today, 25 degrees Celsius. It is a beautiful day, which is actually, I think, the last probably day of summer, it feels like, because we haven't had it this warm in a couple days. But yeah, how is everyone else all over the world? Okay, Paula, that's fine. Catch it in the replay. And also, if you ever get the emails from me for these lives, the same exact links in the emails are the replays. So if you can't watch the whole thing now, you can always come back later and watch it again, because I know it is a lot of information to grasp all at once. Oops. So I did a slightly lower line. I want to make sure I'm really catching that lower line. Okay. All right, so we're getting close here to being able to do our quick paper fitting. And like I said, this is optional. So after you've made a few things with your sloper and you know it fits, you don't have to do this step. but I just thought I would show it as an option because I think when you're first starting out with the sloper, it's good to start to understand these things and see, okay, is this correct? And see if you made any mistakes too. Like if the armhole's looking too low, it's easy to correct it on the pattern before you cut it out and that kind of thing. Okay. All right. Never choose every seam allowances before. Okay. Rhonda, yeah. I know, it's a lot of work. The seam allowances can really take a lot of time. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the other camera. And let's see. Okay, so we've got my dress form that I made with my GRD Moulage. And then I can just simply pin these things to it, which I need my pins. And where are my pins? Oh, how many people lose stuff just like me when you're sewing or making patterns? Okay, I know I have them somewhere. 1 second. I have stuff all over the place in my house. Okay, so we can start placing this, aligning it with the center front. I like to often align it with the apex. I know the apex is aligned the best, and we can start placing it. Now, this has ease to it, so it's not going to be an exact replicate of the dress form. Like we have ease over a little bit from the apex. It's about 1/8 of an inch, which is 4 centimeters, 3 to 4 centimeters, or 3 to 4 millimeters. And then we can just start pinning and checking to see. We allow a gap at the bust. Okay. And are you all seeing this on the dress form? Let me know in the chat. Okay. Oh, okay. So, yeah, Eileen, the replay should have subtitles. It depends on YouTube, but I think most of the time they do auto subtitles. And then we're going to get the front. So repeat where I do 1-inch seam allowances and 3/8 or 5/8. So I like to have 1 inch on the side seam, 1 inch at the shoulder seam, and then 1 inch in the length in case I want to adjust the length at all as I do it. Anything with high curves, the armhole area, the neckline, I like to do 3/8 of an inch. But if you're not sure about the design lines there, you can do 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so we can see kind of position wise, and it's not the easiest thing to do this. Some people even tape the pattern together, and you can do that, or you can pin the pattern together. When we start pinning the pattern, it doesn't lie quite as flat, but we can kind of check and see, is this the direction of where we want things to go? And are the positions lining up well? Okay, so we have something like that, and we can kind of start testing that out to see how that's looking. Big curves like that, I'm not fully working out to force them together because that's too hard with paper, but we can kind of see, are we happy with those design lines? Is it looking like a good position here? And so on. So we'll keep going on with that. Okay. And if I have something that's really heavily with the design positioning, like the pleats of the skirt, I'm going to allow quite a bit of seam allowance there when we get to that part. Okay, so we can kind of see, is it lining up well? Are we pleased with how it's looking? And this is more of a design check, but it can also be used as a fitting check if you're not sure about things. So how you would do this on your body if you don't have a dress form, especially if you don't have a custom dress form is you would tape it together or you would pin it together, and you would not be pinning it directly to your skin, obviously, like we can with the dress form. But we can check and see how are we coming along. And this one, it is a very fitted top portion. So I did very small amount of ease there. So we're gonna have it nice and snug. I took off a little bit off the armhole area because it was gaping just a slight bit in the back there. So it's looking pretty good overall. Okay. Overhead camera can use more lighting. You know what? It's so hard with the lighting because I'm getting this flickering in the lighting. I can move the lights a little closer and see. Okay, so this is a bit hard because we have quite a curve in there. So we would really have to force that paper together. So it doesn't want to force it together because I did take a little bit off to make sure it's nice and fitted there. But in general, I know that this is going to give me quite a good line for the image for the lines. And then we can quickly check the midriff as well. So pinning it sometimes off the dress form and then putting it on the dress form can be a little bit easier when we're dealing with the curves. So, oops, take that off. Okay, and then we have the center back, and we can quickly just check, is that lining up nicely? And it looks pretty good. Okay, looks pretty good. And the front as well. So what I mean about pinning it first is before you get it on the dress form, or if you're doing it on your body, you would just pin it together like that and then place it and check it and see, okay, are we aligning those seams nicely? I can see the seam underneath and it's looking really good overall. Okay, visually I'm really pleased with it. I might end up shortening this a little bit, and that's why I added extra to that seam. So in case I shorten it, I have extra on the midriff here. So if I'm not sure exactly about those lines on underneath, that's why I allow extra seam allowance there. And if I shorten this part, then I can add here and so on. Yeah, but overall, I think it looks really, really nice. Okay, and it's going to be nice and fitted. All right, so that's our quick test in the paper fitting, and then we're going to continue with the skirt next. So in the last video, I did not do the back skirt, so we're going to draft the back skirt. Let me grab that. And actually, before we do that, we're going to do a test. So I do a measurement test often before I will add ease to the bottom hip. And in the last video, I did add some ease to it. So I'm doing a quick measurement check of my hips because I have a weight fluctuation in those hips. And when I'm sitting, I like to just do a quick check of the sitting amount measurement. And I want to make sure I have plenty of ease in that. And so I want to make sure, for me, I'm going to add about 2 inches, which is 5 centimeters, to that measurement of when I'm sitting. And I can even go up a little bit more than that if I want. I'm going to add ample seam allowances on the side seams, just to make sure I have enough, because the moulage and the slope work are the bodice portion. Okay, I know this is going to be loud, so excuse the loudness. Okay, and we're going to switch back to the other camera. All right, so let me try to get the light a little bit closer, but it is going to flicker a bit. Flickering is there. Hopefully that's okay though. It's really hard because the film speed or the video speed is the same frequency as or not the same frequency as the lighting. Is that okay for everyone? Let me know in the comments, and I can also switch that a little bit. Okay. All right, so we're going to do a quick measurement check of the hip, and I want to hit my hip measurement plus 2 inches hip measurement when I'm sitting, and I have my hip lines marked from my sloper. So this was the front sloper here, and I already added a little bit here, but I actually don't remember even how much I added in the last video. So I'm going to measure down, and I'm measuring this across, but it's slightly curved, so I'm kind of following this position. And then I also have the overlap, which is this line here. So this was, oh no, that's my green line. Okay, the overlap was, it's the same. Okay, I don't have the overlap. Okay, I can't even remember what I did a week ago. Okay, so this is the one side with the horizontal pleats, and this is the other side with the vertical pleats. And so I'm measuring it to check and see where I'm at, and I'm gonna definitely be bigger on this now because I've added a bit, plus I've added the pleats in there. So I'm gonna have a little bit of extra room in there. This side I did not mark my hip position, so I'm going to quickly mark that. Which is here. That's my low hip. This is my high hip. Okay, and we're gonna measure kind of straight across here, get that measurement, and then we're gonna continue that measurement across this side. Now we have to imagine these pleats all being closed, so we're gonna kind of follow the pleat up a little bit. So this is my hip line here, I believe. So we have from there. Yep. And we're gonna go from this over. Okay, so I can actually see how much I've added here. So this was my original line, OG, original. And I'm gonna kind of follow this up. So I have a really nice measurement on the front. Okay, 24, we'll say 24 3/4 so that it's easier to do the math. Okay, and then the back, I need to make at least, I said 43 inches about. Okay, let's quickly do the calculator. So 43 minus our 24.75, and I need 18 1/4 for the back, which I know I'm going to be much higher than that for my back pattern piece. Okay. Yes, Helena, I think I always say your name wrong. Okay, we add the 2 inches to the hip measurement once I'm seated. Yes, that's correct. So I'm at 10 inches here, 25.5 centimeters. And I'm required 18 1/4. So I'm bigger than I need to be because of those pleats. But if I was at the minimum amount of 18 1/4, I would for sure need to add even more here because I don't want those front pleats to open up. If I go to the minimum, those front pleats are going to be opening up more than I want them to be. So I have to consider that in my design. And we could measure the pattern like jumping over those pleats as if they were closed, but I'm not exactly sure how full or how closed I want them to be until I get to the fitting part to check the design mainly. But I'm really good with that measurement, so I'm at 20. Okay, so 20 is the half. So this is the full. That's my niece. Let's see here. Okay, so 10 is my half measurement here, and I needed 18 1/4. So 10 meaning it's actually 20. That's why I said I'm good, because this is only half of my back. So I'm plenty good, but the front, I added this little 3/8 of an inch to make sure I was nice and ample there. So I'm going to go ahead and add the same thing to the back. I added a slight bit at the high hip because I don't want those pleats to fully open up. And I know that this pattern piece fits me pretty well, but when I'm seated, it's a little bit on the snug side for a dress. For a blouse, it works okay, but generally the blouse tends to be shorter than that. So I'm going to go ahead and give that 3/8 of an inch, and I do that quick measurement check just to make sure I'm good on the ease amount. And I know it's a little bit more complicated of a style to explain that ease amount, but I hope that makes sense. Okay. So I'm going to be drafting the back pattern piece now. Kathleen, the lighting is fine for you. Great. I know it's that, and this is the difficulty with the lighting, the sound, everything. This technology stuff is like half my battle every day. I feel like the previous camera, or the professional camera, worked previously on this software, but it doesn't work anymore. It's so frustrating. Okay, so we're gonna keep going. I just need to make a little bit more space. This is my back pattern piece, and I did a measurement check on the side seam length, which here we have my side seam, and I like to mark this anytime we have strange things going on with the shapes. This is my princess line originally. And this is my side seam. This is my where's left. So this is this pattern piece. And I want to do a measurement check to make sure that my side seam length of my back matches my pattern piece as well. Okay. Okay. And I want to also make sure I have enough room for seam allowances here. Okay, so this is my front pattern piece. I want my back. So center, back, and side seam. This is my side seam here, and I want to make sure that I'm getting the same measurement over here. So I already added to this pattern of the front the new line, which is the 3/8 of an inch in the last round, 1 centimeter. So I'm putting my sloper pattern on here just as a reference, and I'm adding the 3/8 from the front just so I get a mirrored side seam from the front to the back. And what I'm going to do is, you have a couple options. I'm going to be just marking that there, and I'm going to be using my tracing wheel to mark through the pattern to make sure that I get the same mirrored line. So I did bump this out a slight bit. So my sloper was here before, and I did a slight A-line. Okay, so I'm making sure that this piece matches to the back piece. So it's a little bit tricky to explain. I hope it's making sense. So last time I added 3/8 of an inch. I added a little bit less at the high hip, but it looks like it's a little bit more. This is my front pattern piece. This is going to be my back pattern piece, and I'm going to be using my tracing wheel to mark this front line onto to become my back pattern piece. And this is my seam line. It's not my seam allowance edge. I haven't added seam allowances to this yet. Okay, and I did a slight A-line to this. So if I continued this all the way down, it would be a little bit straighter than what it was. It looks like, yeah. And really, that's kind of cutting it a little bit close on the under pattern piece. Then before I move this away, I want to just quickly mark here. Okay. I want to kind of mark my under pattern here. I guess really on this line. Oh no, the blue line. Okay, and then I'm going to pull this away and make sure I get that same 3/8 of an inch. So I'm pulling my front pattern piece away, aligning this back up here, the 3/8 of an inch here. Okay, then I have, you can't see it very well probably, but this is my line here. And then we're going to use the straight line. Usually we use the straight from the bottom to the bottom section. Okay, then this piece, we're going to say this is going to be a princess seam all the way down. And so I'm taking the dart out basically. And that's going to be my back pattern piece, which I forgot to do the waistline. Okay, and the reason why I'm not just cutting this apart and doing it with this is because then I can just add the seam allowance quickly on here. And I can also A-line this out if I want. So if I want a little bit more fullness, instead of going straight down with the pattern like this and making it less full, I can actually mimic the shape over here and see, okay, this is, I'm going to mark this in so you can see it better. So we can see this is the original line here as if we were to go straight, or we can pivot it out and just have a nice A-line fullness in the back and see if I like that in the fitting. And if I don't like it, I can always take it off. And what that is actually doing also is it's giving just a slight bit more ease to that hip as well. And I forgot to mark the bottom. So I want to make sure that those seam lines are matching up, and part of the reason why we do this is to make sure that it's trued completely. And at the bottom here, okay. So this is my length, and I could kind of have a nice curve to it, which I can get to at the very end probably, because that way I can true the back to it as well. Okay, now the center back piece, I can use this exactly as this was because I only added a little bit to the side seam for the ease amount before. So I can either cut this apart and use it, or I could use my tracing wheel. I'll go ahead and cut it apart so that it's easier for you to see the lines. Okay. And then it's easy for me to add the seam allowances too. Okay, So we want the center back to be straight usually, unless we have a seam. If we have a seam, we can have it curved, and we do have a seam because it's gonna have a zipper back there. So I could use my waist shaping in the back, but I'm not going to. But I am gonna add a little bit of an A-line to the back. And it's really just based on design. Oh, and that's not gonna be long enough. I need to bump it up a little bit higher here to make sure I have enough in the back length. Oh. Okay, so here. Okay. It's looking quite good. Okay. Then I can add a little bit of A-line, and that way I can always take it off if I want it to be a little bit more straight of a cut. But this is just like up to you as the designer. And you know, there's not like a set rule of how much you would add here if you want it to be A-line. It's really just trial and error until you kind of get an idea of what you like. And maybe with the way the fabric drapes, maybe you don't even need it or want it. Okay, I'm gonna use my other marker. Okay, it's flickering and hard to hear. Yeah, okay. The flickering, I'm sorry. Okay. I moved the lights again, but it's still flickering. Unfortunately, that's the best I can do. I don't know what else I can do at this point, so I'm really sorry. Okay, and this one I'm gonna go ahead and add a slight A-line. Yeah, I need to figure out another software to use, unfortunately, with the professional camera. Because the professional camera, you can change the settings on a lot easier than this webcam. Okay, all right, so that's my center back, and this is my princess line, side seam. Okay, and we're gonna go ahead and add seam allowances. So this is gonna be up to you. I will go ahead and just do 3/8 of an inch. I don't need so much here. And we're just going to add that all in. Okay. Is it loud enough for other people? I don't know. This tech stuff really is so hard. Okay. I know every time I go away from the microphone, it's probably harder. Okay, so the waistline, I am gonna give 1 inch of a seam allowance because I did that same amount on the midriff. Okay, and the center back, I also want the 1 inch seam allowance, which is 5/8 or 2.5 centimeters. Okay. Okay, Julie, you need the volume all the way up. Sorry about that. But I'm glad you can hear. Okay, I'm gonna definitely have to figure this out. Is this any better with the volume? I just tried one setting on the microphone. I guess I probably need to talk for you to know if it's any better, but I'm sure when I'm close to the microphone, it's probably a lot better. I'm sure it's when I'm going away from it. Okay. All right, so we're going to quickly cut those apart and true the hem. Oh, thanks, Julie. Glad you're enjoying it. Yeah, you know, I love doing this part, these steps, and so often I'm doing it on my own, and I just really thought, you know what, I should just go live with it, even though the tech part is not my favorite stuff to deal with. It's really, I spent really 2.5 hours trying to get the camera to connect today, and then I just really figured out it must be the latest update with this software that it's no longer compatible. And then I have a different microphone that I just started using about 9 months ago, and it just seems like the sound is great on it, but the loudness seems to be an issue. Like the amount of sound is not quite right. So, and the amount of microphones I've gone through, if you only knew. I think that this is my probably the 5th microphone as far as trying all different options. And sometimes it's connecting to the camera with a different microphone. I have 2 different types of microphones I use when I'm teaching, and those tend to be much better directly on the camera, but since I can't get the professional camera to connect, then I also have an issue there. So right now I'm walking the pattern pieces together, and I can see I'm going to have a slight bit of a roundness here. I'm probably going to end up shaving that off in my fitting if I can, because for the back, I like that curve there, but more than likely I'm going to shave off a tiny bit of the curve there. And then for the bottom here, just keep this together and walk it up. I could have a dropped hem if I want. I could have a slight curve to it. Usually we have a slight curve, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. So something along these lines. And how much of a curve do you add? It really depends on how much of an A-line you have. So the more A-line you have, the more of a curve you need. The straighter it is, the less curve you need, meaning A-line coming out. If it was straighter and more narrow, you would need less curve. So you can see the further it comes out, it's kind of picking up and it's shortening on the sides there a bit. Okay. Then as far as the seam going to a certain way, I would go ahead and fold this to this. And I did not mark this. Okay. There we go. Okay, what is the curve? This is the hem. This is the bottom hem of the... So, Helena, you're asking, what is the curve for again, please? The curve is really the hem line. Instead of going straight, you need to have a slight curve in it usually, especially the fuller it is at the bottom, the more curve you have. All right, so these are done. These are the back pattern pieces. Oh, I need to add the seam allowance at the bottom. And the seam allowance at the bottom, I'm probably going to have a facing at the bottom. If I was not having a facing at the bottom, I would need to have some sort of a taping at the bottom to make sure it kind of gets sucked under correctly. But I am going to do a facing at the bottom in the front and the back. So then I'm only going to go with 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimeter. Okay. to cut the fabric. We would do cut 2 of these mirrored for where's leftwards, right? So with the fabric folded. And I forgot to mark my grain line. So that's an easy fix. Before we cut it apart, we did mark the grain line here. If I hadn't marked the grain line, I would use this grain line as a reference to parallel mark a line down. I can just put this to here, here to here, and use my tracing wheel through this. Now this would be my general straight grain line. When I'm using like a slight A-line to it, I also have the option of flipping that to be in the center of the A-line. So if I have like lines, I might not want the lines to go like this because I might end up with more of a V here, right? So if I were to follow this original grain line, which is here, I would, and this was stripes, I would end up with the V. I have a herringbone. The herringbone is this here. And it might not be super obvious, but I am going to go ahead and take the halfway point of my A-line. Even though my A-line isn't set in the fitting, I might adjust it, but I'm going to measure the middle in the lower section. You could kind of go anywhere down if you wanted. If you wanted to go all the way down to the bottom, you could take the middle there. But basically anywhere here where it's easy to do the math, I'm going to take the midway point, so halfway. And then up here, I'm going to take the midway point, 3 1/4, halfway, and that's going to be my new grain line, just as a reference. And that's so that when I align the pattern pieces later on, that it just looks a little bit more balanced. It's not going to affect the fit really at all, but it's just going to visually look a little nicer. And this is the part that I'm probably going to go ahead and shave off there. But I'm going to wait for the fitting for that. And as well here, I want to make sure that those are no points. That one for sure I can shave off now. That one is super minor, but I want to make sure I have enough shaping where I need it, and then I'll take it off in the fitting if I need to. Okay, so the next thing is seam allowance to the skirt of the front. And we started this process before as far as folding the pleats in the direction, and I marked the pleats in the way that we're folding it to. Now I taped it to a piece of paper already. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, okay. I mean about the curve near the waist. I think you're referring to the princess line where she cut away her dart. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I wasn't following exactly of the question, so thanks for helping. Okay, so I'm folding the dart or the pleats to get the original line here, and I've already taped it to another pattern piece only on one side because I wanted to do this part before I finish taping it. This is just for my seam allowance lines, that piece of paper underneath. And I started doing the pleats last time. I'm going to take so if I really force these together, it would come like that, and it would open up quite a bit, giving me a big kind of poof right there. I don't really want that as much. I want it to be more of a natural fold. And so I'm going to allow it to go where it wants. And I'm going to take the middle line. So I have one line here and I have another line here. It's a little bit of a jog. I'm going to take the middle of those two here. So adding a little bit to that, taking a slight bit off, and then folding this shut. And I'm just getting the lines for the pleats of the folds underneath. So you can see this, you might not be able to see it. Okay, but really we need a slight curve to that. This is my waistline. This is my vertical pleats right here on that wearer's left side. And this is my pleat fold here. And here. All right, so we're going to open that up. And I need to continue that tracing wheel all the way to the front, like this seam here, because it's going to actually get cut off a bit. So I come up and then I come down and then I come up and down because it's coming to this corner a bit. The fold is so deep that there's not enough space for it to go into the waistline. So it's looking like this. And it looks super strange, but that's the reason why we use our tracing wheel, because we would never know that line otherwise. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and tape this pattern piece down for the rest. The reason why I did it with it untaped on this side is because folding another layer of paper just makes it hard. It's easier to just do with the layers that are here. And then this is going to become my new pattern piece on the back. Okay, so I have my side seams 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. Question about the front, right? Are you going to add any overlap? So at the front here, I definitely could add an overlap here of either at the front or at the under part, right? So I definitely want it on the under part. As far as the front goes, I want this princess seam to be continuous all the way down. So I won't be adding it here except for my seam allowance. And my seam allowance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a 1 inch down to kind of here, and then I'm going to notch it down to 3/8 of an inch, just to make sure I have enough room to play in case I don't like it. But generally I would do it only to the bottom part because I want it to line up with my princess seam. But just to have a little bit more room to play with my pleats, that I have enough there of depth, I'm gonna do the 1 inch, maybe even a little bit more. Let's go. Of course I don't have a lot of paper down here, but I'll go with maybe 1.5 inches up here, seam allowance. This is really seam allowance, but, and then I'm going to notch it down to the 3/8. And the reason why I'm allowing that is if I do want to go deeper in those pleats. Such great questions, really good questions. Okay, so I'm doing the 1 inch up here at the top. On the other pattern with the horizontal seams, and this is going to be tricky. It's not going to want a 1 inch seam for these strange shapes. Okay, now what's important here are these notches. So from one pleat to the next, as far as the fold goes, this is one that's important, and we want to continue this one all the way up. That's an important notch. And always marking the direction of your folds is really important. So this would be continuation of another pleat. I would follow this line up right there, and this following it up wherever that ends up here. Okay. So just following the 1 inch seam allowance of my midriff for the waistline, but on the other, I can't even see, there we go. and then we're side seam, so we're 1 inch and 2.5 centimeters. On the other pattern piece with the horizontal pleats, I'm going to give a much bigger seam allowance up there, so I have room to play with the drape if I need to of those pleats. So I'm going to give like 3 inches there, which is quite a bit, like 7.5 to 8 centimeters, just so I have enough. Okay. All right. And this, again, you can do a paper fitting if you want onto your dress form or onto your body. And that's harder to do when we have so many pleats in there. The paper does not like to fold. Okay. All right, so that's our front. Where's left? Okay. All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and jump to the upper portion. Unless, do people want to see me add seam allowance to this pattern piece? I would be doing probably 3 inches, 3 inches up here, and maybe coming down actually about 1 inch on the sides here, just to play around with those, or maybe even do 2 inches here, because the amount we fold, if we fold more or less, we need ample seam allowance there. And I would do 3 inches here just to have more room to play with in case I want to go deeper with any of those. Not necessary. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump to the facing part of the front and the back upper sections. Okay, so we have the front. And we're going to use a piece of paper back here. We have many options for doing the facings. We can do a direct tracing of it. What I like to do is tape the 2 pieces together, and we mark the facing. I'm going to do it in another color. Maybe we'll do it in bigger. Okay, so general facing can be 1.5 inches to 2 inches, 4 centimeters to 5 centimeters, or 3.5. I'm going to do 1.5, and this marker does not do well on the tape, so we will see. And then it's going to continue. The facing is going to be this whole section and then all of this. And it doesn't have to be this big. It could even be 1 inch if you want. There's not like a set rule to this. So that's one facing. And the nice thing about once we have it marked on here is we just do a quick tracing of the outer edges with the seams already marked on there, because the seam amount will be the same generally. Because if we make any adjustments, I'm going to do it in this. Now, the important thing with seam allowances, or I'm sorry, facings, is that we have to make them a little bit smaller than the outer piece. And we need to do that especially in this area. That's generally the area where we do it in. And if I'm making any fitting updates as I'm sewing, I'm making sure that I come back to this facing pattern and making the same exact updates. Okay. All right, so this is my sew line between my lining and my facing. My facing is going to be my main fabric, and it doesn't include the seam allowance on there yet. So I'm going to mark it with a tracing wheel. Okay, take it away, and I'm going to true that line. And really, if I was working fast, I would not even do this. I would just go straight to adding seam allowances. But since you can't see this trace line, I'm just going to quickly mark this here so you can see it. We want to make sure that the center front is squared off at a 90-degree angle. If I wanted to, I can also do a roundness there, which will help with sewing. So actually, I forgot to do that before, so something like that. And I would mark that as well here. So I could take this pattern piece and trace it onto there, or I can just do a quick reference and see my line through there. Okay, so I'm going to X out that, and then it's a round shape, much easier for sewing. Okay, and square this off. Yep, it would be nicer to have a curve there than a point. All right, just saw your message, so interesting. Okay, wonderful that you guys are all tuning in still, and some of you have to run. That's totally fine. Okay, so I'm gonna add seam allowance. So 3/8 of an inch should be enough. Okay, the rest has seam allowance already. And then I need to make a slight update to the width of the strap. Okay, so easily cutting that out. I want to go ahead and do an overlap. And usually the rule is that we're taking off about 1/8 of an inch, between a 1/16 of an inch and 1/8 of an inch, which is in centimeters, 3 millimeters, 2 to 3 millimeters usually. And we're gonna just overlap that amount, because if we don't, what's gonna happen is that the facing width will end up showing on the sides here. We wanna make this a little bit smaller here all the way down, just to make sure that this is not coming out on either side, and we want to make sure it's a little bit smaller. So we're going to just tape that together here and here. We would follow that same exact procedure for the back. Right, our side seam, center front, and that's our shoulder, and we say front. Okay, then I know the rest already has a seam allowance. That's why I like to wait until I've marked my seam allowances first. Then I do my facings, because otherwise I have to do the seam line tracing, then add the seam allowances after, and it's just quicker to have the seam allowances done, use that as your trace line, and then make the adjustments. So the next step is to do the lining. And the lining, depending on what you're sewing, we always need more length in the lining. So this, we can mark the outer line, and that has my seam allowances. And in some cases, like suit jackets, things like that, we would add a pleat to the back. In other cases, like this style, I would eliminate the pleats in the front. because I don't want to have extra fullness, and the pleats can actually help hold those, removing the pleats in the lining can help hold the pleats in place for the external part, the main pattern. Okay, so that is okay, so this is my and at this point I could have done two options. I can do a quick slash and spread to get the length I need because I want to add just a little bit to the length. I could simply add it, or I could do a slash and spread across and add it if the shape is quite different. When it's going straight down, I can simply add it and just make sure that this measurement at the bottom is the same measurement up top. Or I could have marked, which I'll show you in the next option actually, because there are so many different ways of doing this manually. So we need to add the seam allowance here, 3/8 of an inch. Not sure why adding the length, because what ends up happening when we're moving in the garment, if we don't have longer length in the lining, depending on the length of the bodice, if we don't have longer length, it can pick up the outside and make it bunch, especially if it shrinks at all in ironing. Of course, you pre-wash the fabric when it's possible. This is a wool fabric, which I would only dry clean. But if it shrinks at all in ironing or after time, even if we wash it once, it can still shrink after we wash it once. And if we're drying it or anything like that. And as we're wearing it, I don't know if you've ever had it where you're wearing a jacket or something and you see that the outside is like picking up too much. We usually actually want to have longer on the lining, and that kind of hangs over a facing a bit on a suit jacket or something, and it's just so that it's not picking up the outside and causing it to bubble or gape at all. Okay, so this, I'm just going to continue that up and continue this up so I know when I'm cutting it that I've already added seam allowances, and then I can just do a quick slash and spread here and add my length to it, which I would just do about 1/4 of an inch just to make sure. 1/4 of an inch is 6 millimeters. And then I can just use another piece of paper behind it. And that way, if there's a slight curve to it, it just keeps that original curve, and just adding a little bit to the length, that 1/4 of an inch. Now, I probably don't need 1/4 of an inch in such a short bodice. I would for sure want that much, and maybe even a bit more in a jacket, but I'd rather have too much length than too little in the lining. And what I end up doing is I end up hand sewing the lining in place at the midriff area so that I'm sure to have enough length in the top portion, and when I'm wearing the dress, it's not pulling at all strangely. That's generally what I like to do. And then just trim those lines, and then we're marking this as our lining. So we need to, so I did the front as bias for the grain line. I would mimic that same thing onto the lining just because it gives a nice shape there. The bias stretches nicely, and we can always throw stuff on the bias on the lining to get a nice shape to it as well. Especially the back area, if you're doing a different, okay, let me just write this front lining. Okay, we would mimic the same exact concept for the front pattern piece, slashing and spreading the 1/4 of an inch, 6 millimeters, and we've already done the facing for this part. Okay, so that's the concept for facings and linings as well. Now for, let's say, this piece right here, I actually don't need to create a lining piece because I've already added the length in the lining up here, and I would hand sew the inside to make sure that I have enough length in the upper portion. I would hand sew the lining to the outside on the seam allowance on the inside, and in that case then I would just do a cut 1 of main fabric. Okay, this one would be cut 2, it's the back, cut 2 main fabric, and cut 2 lining. Okay, and this one would be cut 1 on the fold, and cut 1 on fold, lining. And we always want to write that on there. Cut 1 on fold, main fabric. I don't have to do lining or facing of this because we've already created the separate pattern pieces for that. Well, we will be doing that. I'll do that later, but I think you guys get the concept. Let me get a quick drink of water. Are there any questions? Okay. All right. So that's the basic concept as far as the back goes. Let's take a look at the back. We would do the same exact concept here. So we would create the lining and the facing. So we would tape this pattern piece to this. It's a little bit trickier because it's on a nice rounded curve. And mark the facing. And really 1.5 is a very ample amount. I don't need to have that much, but it'll look nice on the inside. Okay. And then as far as removing pleats on the lining of the bottom portion, I can go through that if anybody wants to know how you would do that. But I'm not going to do that in the live because I might be adjusting the pleat depths in my fitting. So I can explain it if anyone wants to hear that. Okay. All right. Okay, so the midriff lining is not attached to the bodice lining. Yes, so I actually do the entire lining together, sewing the entire lining together. It is connected to the bodice lining. And then after I sew the entire lining together, then I do a hand sewing of the inside and the outside together at that seam, just so that it hangs correctly. If I did no tacking on the seam allowance of this midriff to the bodice portion, it probably it wouldn't hang as well generally. And so I like to do an internal tacking of the upper portion to the midriff at the lining seam allowance to the body seam allowance. But we're sewing the entire lining together. We're sewing the entire facing to the lining, and then we're sewing the entire main fabric together. Then we're putting them together and then sewing the midriff together. I like to do that. It's not a requirement though. Okay. All right. So I think that's the concept. Are there any other questions to the facing up above and the lining portion up above? And we'll go through the explanation. Thanks for your feedback, Nikki. All right. Okay, great that you understand. Let's go through the pleats and how we would delete the pleats. Okay, so we don't have to delete the pleats here. We could delete them, or we could also mimic the same thing. But often when we have a bulkier fabric, we're trying to eliminate bulk of the inside as well. And when we're trying to get a positioning to stay in place, getting a smaller, shorter lining can actually help these pleats stay in place. So that's why after I do the fitting of this whole section, I'm going to see, am I happy with all the depths? If I'm not, I'm going to make small adjustments to the depths while I'm wearing it. I'm going to put this on top of a dress or on my dress form, and then I'll pin it to myself and I'll check and see, okay, am I happy with everything? After I know I'm happy with everything and I've adjusted it if I need to, then I would mark it on my pattern. Let's say I go from a 2.5 inch depth to a 2-inch depth. Then I would mark it on my pattern and say, okay, that's my updated pattern. Then come back and make my lining after I've done those adjustments for the depths, just making them smaller, bigger, whatever I require in the fitting. Then afterwards, we're doing the same exact concept as we did when we slashed and spread it open. We're actually just slashing it and closing it. So it's the same exact process in reverse. Instead of getting all of those pleats as we need them to be, we need to close them back up. And so if we're adjusting it, we would be adjusting it to the new line and then doing basically a tracing of this and slashing and closing exactly what we need. Now on the vertical pleats, we probably want to keep some of those pleats because it will help add ease to the hip. This is for the horizontal pleats, and it helps hold those horizontal pleats in place because gravity is working against us. Now, when it comes to the vertical pleats help add ease to our garment. And I don't know where my sketch went. Here it is. And those vertical pleats can actually help make sure that we have enough fullness in that hip, that it's not pulling and tugging in a strange area. So in this case, I would gladly leave those pleats in the lining, or at least one of them. So I might take out the bigger one possibly, just because if it's going around these corners and everything, we don't want bulkiness in this area. We want it to lie really flat against the body. But for this pleat, I might leave this pleat in there. And again, I would wait until I've gone through my fitting and I'm pleased with the depths. Once I'm pleased with the depths, I would remark the pattern if they've changed. And then I would slash this one closed. Just like we slashed it open, we'd close it. And I would keep this one open. And I would have an actual pleat in my garment on the lining part just to add fullness. All right, is that making sense? Are there any questions to this process? Let me know. And I know it's been, there we go. I know it's been a lot of patience with the lighting and the camera quality and everything. Of course, this is my Mac webcam, and this is such a better quality than the other one that I spent quite a lot on. But technology just changes. So all right, I think that's everything. And if there's any other questions, let me know in the chat. I've had so much fun, and I hope you've appreciated this. I know a lot of people emailed me about doing a follow-up, and I really appreciate you tuning in to this live session. I hope to do more of these in the future, and if you enjoyed it, please make sure you like it. That always helps the channel, and it helps other people learn more, and you're always helping the community by liking any content on my channel or subscribing as well. So the more people who subscribe, the more YouTube reaches in our community, and that's actually a way that you can help other people learn as well. And yes, Susan wants more, please. Rhonda, have you considered doing videos on the sewing process? I have considered that, and I'm actually considering to do that for the rest of this dress. I would have to kind of figure that out with the camera settings, but if you're interested in doing that, and we could do kind of a sew along process, and it could be something that you're tuning in while you're sewing your project, and just kind of something like that. Because the thing is when I'm doing this live, you can see how much slow time is in the actual process, that sometimes it can be requiring a lot of patience to tune in if I'm taping and doing all this. And so I know it's not like a super sped up process, but yeah. Oh, Rhonda, you would love that. Okay, wonderful. And yeah, Kathleen too, great. So nice, Helena, to see you. Oh, really, really nice to see you all. So I'll consider that probably maybe the first week of October if I don't get to sewing this before then. But I have to have this done by, yeah, the 7th of October. So for the wedding that I'm going to. But thanks so much for tuning in. I really, really appreciate your taking the time to be with me. And I love this community so much. All right. Take care. Thanks for joining, and see you next time.